If you thought we were in the clear and everything was going to grow from here on out, I'm going to show you why that is not the case. It's important that we realize what the biz had to say, what the central banks are looking at, and the actions that they're taking, because that could hit you and swipe you off your feet, and I'm going to show you why that is the case. Welcome, truth seekers. You've come to the right place. I can show you the information that others simply can't. So join this grassroots movement of nearly 300,000 people. Hit that subscribe and the notification so that we can conquer this together. But speaking of which, when you look at the data as it comes through, it starts to tell a story only when we connect the dots. And we're going to do just that today. I wanted to look at what the biz had to say. Right here. You can look at it. Despite the relentless rise in rates over the past 18 months, inflation in many top economies remains stubbornly high, with the jump in borrowing costs triggered the most serious banking collapses since the financial crisis 15 years ago. This is the Biz General Manager. The global economy is at a critical juncture. Stern challenges must be addressed. The time to obsessively pursue short-term growth is past. Monetary policy must now restore price stability. Fiscal policy must consolidate. And what they're saying here is that in order to get inflation down, we got to stop the money printing, all the quantitative easing coming from the central banks. At the same time, we have to stop all this stimulus that's coming from the government side. These two things create that inflation as the money supply expands. It creates a problem. We know this. And so they need to stop it or inflation will continue to increase. Price inflation. Look at what's happening with rent, with mortgages, with energy prices, and with every other type of measurement. It's going higher. Now you can look at the CPI and the core PCE and you'd say, hey, it's going down. What's this guy talking about? But actually the measurement that the Federal Reserve and other central banks around the world look at is not the same one that they show you on the news talking about inflation going down. There's all different ways to measure inflation. In fact, it's persistently high according to their measurements. And there's a problem. There's a problem because they don't even show us the real level. So imagine how bad it really is. So of course, we need to expect that we will be dealing with higher interest rates for the foreseeable future until there is a crisis and an excuse to cut, which they're loving that and will of course do so, but it's going to take some sort of event. We had the banking crisis. The banking crisis is not over. I've described that in previous videos just recently, and I want to show you a few things that will tie all in. Really quickly, you're seeing this come up in the news a lot, right? For preparing for new round of layoffs for U.S. salary workers. The Kellogg's, among the 75 companies France has asked for price cuts. So these things are happening. Input costs too high. These companies are trying whatever they can do to make themselves more profitable. They want their shareholders to be taken care of. Corporate bankruptcies and defaults are surging. This is just one thing. Like when you take it for what it is, like you got to understand that, okay, we have 41 corporate defaults. That's this year, and that is more than double the same period last year. And over the past few years, it's kind of difficult because of everything with the moratoriums, and there was all these incentives, there was tax benefits, all these things that made it a little bit skewed. So I don't necessarily want to take that number as it is, as it stands, but it's important to note that this is happening right now, that companies are not feeling the effects of all that stimulus that came before. And there are some companies like Nvidia that's feeling the love, and Apple and all these other big boys that are getting a lot of this. But some companies, despite the fact that they might be in every household, they are not performing well, okay? And that goes for their stock and their business, okay? Companies are defaulting on their debt due to uncertain economic conditions and heavy debt loads. It's really the second part. High interest rates have made it difficult to refinance as debt is more expensive. So you see what happens here. If interest rates are going down, just like you, the individual, could refinance and get cheaper prices as time goes on, now we're going the opposite direction. The prices at which we have to pay are going higher, and so that means it's more of a burden. It's not less of a burden. Consumers, not factories, are carrying the global economy. Manufacturing PMIs for June disappoint across Europe and the US. Gloom contrasts with reduced forecasts for US recession. So nobody really knows what's going to happen. If you take some indicators like the yield curve, it's flashing red, like recession, absolutely no question. However, you look at other indicators and it's saying, well, inflation's coming down, the jobs numbers are still good, unemployment's super low, and that sort of thing. But all I can tell is that the real economy is not very strong. Yes, you see the consumers buying more than ever before. When you look at some of the data, though, it starts to shine a light on that. Credit card usage is at the highest it's ever been. Personal savings rate is super low. You can see, one thing after another, making it seem like, well, I think people are just spending more money now to get less stuff. And then on top of that, we have the inflationary factor. Like, for instance, if you would go to the grocery store and your budget was $100, you're going to spend $100. That was, let's say, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, $100. Now you're getting less for that $100. So all the prices have increased. At the same time, on top of that, you've got shrinkflation, because every product you buy from, let's say, 3-4 years ago till now, I know that you go to buy the bag of thing and the jar of that, and there's less stuff inside. Just like the services. You used to get, the car, let's just use example of car wash. Okay, the car wash includes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. Oh, now that's another premium level. For that same price, you can get, the 1, 2, 3 things. Oh, but that's weird. I used to get it all included for that price. Shrinkflation. They're shrinking the services. They're shrinking the products. Do you see what's happening here? You're paying the money. You're still paying that $100 for those groceries. You're just getting much less. Almost a third of America's homeless population lives in California, according to this study. And I'm just showing you this to dictate the fact that more and more people are finding themselves out on the streets. Prices are clearly unaffordable when it comes to rent, when it comes to mortgages, and when it comes to the general cost of living. And that doesn't add up in the stats. It's not going to add up. When we look at it on a national aspect with debt, Zambia wins debt relief, sets precedent for stressed nations. I found this interesting because it's not just individuals that are restructuring their debt, they're going bankrupt, they're dealing with a crisis. It's countries too. Okay, they're restructuring $6.3 billion of debt. Extend maturities by over 20 years. Would you do that with a country? Would you give your money to a country for 20 years, or I guess an extension of 20 years? What's going to happen to Zambia in a 20-year period? Would you? Would you even give 20 years of time to the United States? That's a question for you, and I want to know in the comments below. Would you lend your money? Because that's what you're doing if you buy a bond, for instance. You buy a bond. You're lending that cash out, and they're saying, we're going to pay you back in a few years. But would you do so? That's the question I pose related to this. It has nothing to do with this one particular country. It's for any country. We are in an ironic situation where the more hawkish central banks are in hiking rates, the better it is for inflation credibility and long-term yield stability. That is very true, assuming that there are no fiscal upsets along the way. This is true if markets see long-term inflation expectations being anchored close to 2%, and if they view long-term growth rates to be no higher than what they are today. So that's the expectation. We really don't know how it's going to unfold. But if things continue the way they are, we can see that inflation will come down because they'll leave interest rates high. That's the belief. However, we could see a turnaround. They start a recession, a crisis happens, we have to cut interest rates. We don't want this to happen. Let's stop the quantitative tightening. Let's start getting this going. And so what happens? Inflation starts to pick up, but not in everything. So the stock market, maybe that comes down a little bit. Maybe real estate comes down a little bit. But the prices that we pay at the store, those can continue to go up. So it really all depends. Inflation comes in many forms, but This is where we are at. We are at a critical moment in time right here and now. And so I watch all the things to do with the central bank. Every single central bank, I pay attention to that. If you want to know all the details, you don't have to go searching and try and find all this stuff. Just subscribe. I'll bring you every single day. Stubborn UK inflation triggers a mortgage crisis for millions. This is the same information I'll show you in a second. The Bank of England's efforts to rein in price growth risks a recession, just like the United States. Mortgage crisis to wipe out savings of 1.2 million households as repayments are set to surge. So this goes on for other countries as well. You got to renegotiate or refinance at a higher level. A lot of these countries, that's what happens. Canada and others, you're not getting a 25-year mortgage, a 30-year mortgage, even a 15-year mortgage. You're not going to get that. You're going to get to pay it off over that period, but you've got to refinance every few years. And so the banks are going to love that one. Okay, it's not like the US where if you got that mortgage at 3%, you're laughing. Just stick with that. Hold on tight, okay? Don't let go. UK banks pressed on mortgage stress agreed a longer foreclosure relief. And that's what's happening. You could see that individuals are being pressured. This is just one piece of that puzzle. And then we have this, I want to finish off right here. Under its QT program, the Bank of England is unwinding its balance sheet of corporate and government bonds built up since the financial crisis. They are basically getting rid of these. They want to sell them off. And are they going to be able to? Well, if they do so, this is part of the whole tightening. And in tightening, they put a lot of pressure on basically everybody all down the line. Now, they have to do this to get inflation in check. Will they be able to without a crisis? Because as soon as a crisis starts, there goes all of this quantitative tightening, and get ready for the inflationary fire. You're probably asking, well, how do I prepare? What do I do? I don't know. The pillars of prosperity are the two things that you need to know: increasing your income and self-sufficiency. I talk about both of these right here in this video. Click it and I'll see you there.